Hello and welcome to the second and latest installment of what we're now increasingly referring to as PBB TV. My name is Pete Nicholls and I'm one of the facilitators here at Dads in Distress, which is part of Parents Beyond Breakup. And with me today, I have a guest. His name is Ken Thompson. So Ken, can you introduce yourself to our audience? Who is Ken Thompson?
Okay. Yeah, hi Pete, and hello to all the people who are watching. Yeah, who am I? I was a firefighter for many years. I was a firefighter with what's now Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and until 10 years ago when I left the organisation for reasons which will become clear as we go through this interview, I was the Deputy Commissioner of the organisation. I'm a father. I'm an environmentalist and I do quite a bit of cycling as well, and we'll probably be talking about that a little bit further on as well. Certainly not competitive cycling, just commuting and touring, but it's a real passion of mine.
My backstory is I used to do a lot of off-road cycling, but I've damaged my knee, so I don't.
Yes,
it does get to you in the end. But so you're working from home today?
Yeah. I mean, with COVID, it's been kind of, locked down, and I think I've just got used to being at home, to be honest.
Well, I mean, being ex-firefighter, but being a firefighter working from home is never a good thing.
No.
Bad joke in there somewhere. So, look, without going into the full backstory just yet, I did read that you made Dad of the Year. So, what's the story there?
Yeah, that was in the Netherlands.
Aussie made it Dad of the Year in the Netherlands.
Yeah, the first foreign Father of the Year in the Netherlands, which I was quite proud of. And that came about because, my son, who we're going to be talking about a little bit later on, was located in the Netherlands after having disappeared for 3 years. And it was a big, big story in the Netherlands. And a lot of the fathers groups, kind of reached out to me and gave me a lot of support while I was over there. And it really, it touched a nerve with them. And they felt that, everything that had been done deserved some kind of recognition. So, that's how it came about. And this, if you can see it there, I don't know if you can see it, this is the actual award. That's it. That's a father holding its child. And I don't know if you can see the red mark there, that's the father's heart. So I'm very proud of having received that award. That was in 2010.
Well, look, apart from some fascinating insights, which I know you're going to be able to share, and we'll get into that next, that accolade as Father of the Year has earned you our respect from everyone at Dads in Distress and Mums in Distress. You've earned our respect, and it's one of the reasons we'd love to get to know you a little bit better. So we're honored to have you with us here today, Ken. Thank you for being here. So look, for many, you are a real life hero, quite apart from your firefighting background, but there's a tragic story behind this as well. And I'm aware that some of what you're here to talk about today may still be a sensitive issue. So within the realms of what you feel that you are able to say, could you tell us a little bit about the events that led to what might be referred to as your 15 minutes of fame?
Yeah, well, it was completely unexpected, I have to say. What I believed, very, very happily married, with a lovely family, and my wife, my son, myself, and then overnight things just to use the vernacular, turned to crap. And I had no idea what was going on. Everything was just falling apart around me. My wife just kind of shut down completely, didn't really want to have much to do with me at all. And even greater concern was the fact that she was deliberately isolating me from my son. So I had no idea what was going on. But it turned out that, I don't want to get into the detail, but she had formed a whole lot of beliefs about my relationship with my son that weren't true. And she was acting on those beliefs. When I became aware of what those beliefs were and the action that she was taking and the action she proposed to take at that time, I had to get legal advice straight away. I just didn't know what to do. And my lawyer very quickly, once he heard the story, recommended that I commence legal action in the family court. I didn't want to do that. I thought, we can fix this. I don't know what's going on, but, there's been some kind of misunderstanding, or I didn't know what was going on at the time. So I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to try and resolve matters. My ex-wife and my son had by then moved from home, and I was having no contact with them whatsoever, apart from very difficult contact with his mother. So we wanted to try and resolve the issue between ourselves with the help of the lawyer, but that didn't go anywhere. So at the end of the day, I had no choice but to initiate proceedings in the family court in an attempt to be able to re-establish the relationship with my son, which by then that relationship had been it hadn't been there for about probably 3 months.
Right.
So I knew in that time that a lot of damage could be done to my son emotionally, and I had concerns to some extent about his physical well-being as well. Right. So, honestly, I can remember crying, when I signed the affidavits. I just didn't want to do it. I just couldn't believe I was going down that path.
And I can relate to that well.
I had no choice. I really had no choice. There was nowhere else to go. So the matter went to court. And for those who are familiar with the process, the applications are made, the affidavits are prepared and signed, they're submitted, and then the first step in the process is a mention before a judge. And during the mention, obviously there were arguments, coming from both sides, but also an independent children's lawyer had been appointed by the court. And I was arguing through my lawyer that I wanted to re-establish contact with my son. His mother was objecting very strenuously to that. The independent children's lawyer agreed that there should be some contact. And as a result of that, I was allowed to have contact with my son at a contact centre. And
supervised?
Hey?
Was that supervised quite often?
Yeah, very closely supervised, close supervision.
In of itself, that is a horrible experience.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to take any photographs of my son. I wasn't allowed to be alone with him at all. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I was, that either of us were going through that process. But the judge had granted me sort of unprecedented contact. I was allowed to have contact with him 3 times a week, which is unheard of at a contact centre. So, I took full advantage of that to be able to see him those 3 times a week. But that came at a cost. There was a financial cost. I think it was costing me around about $700 a week just to be able to see my own son, And I thought, why I've done nothing wrong? Why am I doing this? But it had to be done. And at the same time, the judge ordered an independent expert witness assessment, and a psychiatrist was appointed by the court to do a forensic investigation of me, my wife at the time, and my son.
And just that's a relatively normal thing to happen for those that might not be.
Yeah,
that's actually quite a normal part of the procedure in a family court to assess where is everyone on a mental health scale.
Yeah, but it's not without its problems, because there's always, the way the system works is that the parents nominate the psychologist or the psychiatrist, and of course there's suspicion there straight away. This person is nominating someone who's going to be favourable to me, and that person is nominating someone who's not. So at the end of the day, the judge listens to the arguments for and against, and then makes a decision. And in my case, the psychiatrist that we had nominated was the one who was appointed, largely because the other psychiatrist wasn't available for a longer period of time. But I mean, straight away, that kicked off all kinds of arguments about bias towards fathers and bias against mothers and so forth. But the investigation was carried out, and then the report was provided to the court, and also to my ex, because she was representing herself. So she was allowed to have a copy of the report. I wasn't allowed to have a copy of the report. The report wasn't favourable to her, and she promptly left the country with my son.
When look, I'm not to ignore the bigger point here, but I'm kind of interested on a technical aspect. So, were you allowed to see that report yourself because you were represented? Could it only be seen by your representatives, or was it?
It could only be seen, yes, by the court and by the lawyers. And she was representing herself, so she was able to see the report.
Wow, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
It's the way the legal system works. I don't know if it's similar in other countries. But that's the way it works in Australia. I think it would be much better, if the court had a list of psychiatrists and the judge then, made an appointment off that list. But the way it works in Australia is that you start basically from opposing sides of the table from the moment you step into the courtroom. Then the judge makes a decision. So straight away, there's a reluctance on one side or the other to accept the findings of the independent expert witness.
Gotcha. But to get back to the bigger point, and I apologise for taking away, but I was just interested in the technical point because I think it's a real learning point for a lot of those people who are listening or watching, I should say. But then she took your child.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't even know. I didn't know that had happened. I was still travelling to the contact centre. I didn't even know that the report had been provided to the court at that time. And my son wasn't being brought to the contact centre. So the contact centre went through the emergency numbers, telephone numbers had been disconnected or, didn't answer, people didn't return calls. I was then told by my lawyer, he's a very good lawyer, but it wasn't enough to sort of go back to court because of one instance of the child not being delivered to the contact centre. There had to be a pattern of behaviour. So I think it was about, probably 3 or 4 visits that were missed before we were able to take the matter to court. So, through all this, the time for the person taking the parent is increasing and they're getting further and further away. And the trail has gone cold. Now, the first I found out that my son had been taken was when we were in court. And the mother's had a legal representative at that time, and the judge asked if they'd had any contact, and they said no. So the judge then called an adjournment, and he asked for the marshal of the court to contact the AFP to find out what they could find out. It was an adjournment. 2 hours later, we came back and we all came back in and sat down and then stood up for the judge. And he said, I'm very sorry to tell you, Mr. Thompson, that your child's been taken out of the country. Wow. And that was the first, so that was probably maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks after they'd gone. Wow. So then it's like, what do you do? Where do you go?
Well, exactly.
So the judge then immediately issued an interim parenting order that said that my son was to live with me. He then issued a recovery order, which sort of set the legal process in place for him to be located and then returned. But the problem with all of that is the Australian, and it's the same in any other country, Australian court orders have no validity outside Australia. They're only effective within the jurisdiction. So, it was good that he did that because it certainly helped later on. But at that particular point in time, it really meant nothing. So then it was a matter of, okay, what do I need to do next? And that was when I became involved in the whole Hague Convention process.
And that's something that you had to initiate yourself. That's not
Yes.
something that the court
No.
kind of automatically.
No, the court, all the court will do is, issue the orders, the recovery order, like they call it a location and recovery order. But then, it's up to you then to establish to contact the central authority, which is it's a unit within the Attorney General's Department, the Federal Attorney General's Department, and every country that's a signatory to the Hague Convention is required to establish a central authority.
Yep.
So the central authority is, they're the people you contact when this type of situation happens. And then you need to go through quite an exhaustive application process. And again, I can talk about the weaknesses in this process all the way through. But one of the weaknesses is for the central authority to actually start to act on your behalf, they have to know the country the child has been taken to. Now, if you don't know the country the child has been taken to, there's nothing they'll do.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and we didn't know. At that point in time, we didn't know. So then it was a matter of trying to find out, where they'd gone. And the Department of Immigration only had an exit, the departure information. And all that said was that they were flying from Sydney to Singapore, and there was no further information beyond that. Okay. So then it became a matter of trying to get the information from the airline, and the airline refused to provide it under privacy laws. So that meant then issuing a subpoena on the airline to get the information. All of this takes time.
Of course, yeah.
And every day is another day of just incredible trauma for the parent. And, it just enables the abducting parent to put more distance between them and yourself. And this went on for months.
Yeah.
It wasn't just didn't, happen overnight. I mean, even to get the information from the airline, once we issued the subpoena, it was probably several weeks before we got that information.
It is a truly astonishing phenomenon if you stop and think about it, that there are so many things that can happen that are awful in someone's life, whether it's actually, just to take the example of your background as a firefighter, your place is on fire, someone's broken into your home, a murder has been committed, no matter what, someone's ill, you can call the professionals and they'll take over.
That's right.
Have your child abducted and it's like, it's over to you now.
And that's what I think I found the most astonishing.
Yeah, and yet you're so stressed because you've just lost your child.
Yeah.
And then you've got to think logically, well, how do I go through this morass of a system?
Yeah, and you're not thinking logically. You're overcome with emotion.
Yeah.
Confusion. Yeah. It's a terrible thing to have to do. And you're exactly right. I mean, I come from a background where somebody's in trouble. They pick up the telephone, they ring, and within a few minutes, someone's there and they're taking control of the situation. They're trying to help you put your life back in order. And that was, I guess I was expecting something like that because that's my background. But it doesn't work like that. Far from it. It's the worst thing a parent can go through, I think. I mean, it's recognised as an extreme form of domestic violence and an extreme form of child abuse. So you're dealing with those two things at the same time.
But it was interesting, and look, I'm not going to put a male-female mum-dad spin on this, because as an organisation that looks after mums and dads, we know it can happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Equally as painful, and I wouldn't want to take that away from anyone.
No.
An interesting thing that a few years ago, I remember speaking to a Professor Bruce Smythe at the ANU, and he'd done some research. He was from the Australian Institute of Family Studies. My apologies, Bruce, if I've said that incorrectly. But it was interesting that I think he looked at some of the worst, most protracted family law cases. And he said that what was most interesting about it was that there was a characterization of those cases specifically, which is that one or both of the parents had a morbid and irrational hatred of the other.
Yeah.
Would do anything to harm that other parent, including damaging themselves and the child.
Exactly.
The other person.
Exactly.
It was an astonishing thing for me that was the most common phenomena for the worst cases.
Yeah.
So this is a semi-normal thing.
Yeah, it is. It is.
We don't have a system to deal with it, apparently.
Yeah. One parent wants to destroy the other and they'll weaponize the child to do it. I mean, that might be a genuine reason, or it's something they've, determined themselves, based on joining some dots perhaps that don't actually join. And because they tend not to seek any kind of validation or confirmation of their belief, they act on that. And the other person is just left kind of stunned and stranded, thinking, what happened? What went wrong? I mean, if the person, normally a person who's dealing with a complex situation will kind of contact someone else and, what do you think about this? But these people don't do that. They just say, no, that's it. I'm on. I hate that person. I'm going to destroy that person.
Well, it's intriguing to me as well that, as an organization, one of the things that, at the core of what we do is that we believe that every child should have the best possible start in life. And one of the ways that we can help deliver on that is to ensure that mums and dads are kept alive and in their kids' lives. All right, that's our tagline. But underlying that is that we're in the game of suicide prevention here, because this is one of the most stressful things you can do to a human being, is to take a child away from them.
Yeah.
And in some respects, the system generally recognizes that bereavement is a prompt for suicide in people. This is kind of, in a way, worse because there's no finality to it. It's like a bereavement. It's like
the term, the mental health.
For most parents we work with, it's worse for you because you don't know where they are.
No, the term the mental health professionals use is complex grieving. Right. You're constantly grieving. There's no end to it. There's no resolution because you don't know. You don't know if your child is alive. You don't know if your child is dead. You don't know where your child is. You don't know if you're ever going to see or hear from your child again. With a like a fatality, that's the end. And that there's nothing you can really do about that. You ultimately have to accept it. And then, in some way, you can move on. But there's no finalization with this. It's just open. You don't know what's happening. It's an absolutely terrible situation to find yourself in. And, there are parents, and I'm not talking just fathers, mothers and fathers who've gone through this, who've committed suicide because they've just found it so frightening, so terrifying, so traumatized. And they just can't cope with it. They can't deal with it. Destroys their lives.
A sense of isolation and hopelessness.
Hopelessness, that's the word, the term is often used, living in limbo. Yeah. Because you just don't know. You can't do anything. You can't plan anything. You can't plan your life. You can't, help your child plan their life. Your partner has gone and everything that you knew and lived for and believed in is gone as well. But there's no resolution to it. And in my case, I knew I'd done nothing wrong. So I thought, that made it even worse. If I had done something wrong, I'd say, okay, all right, I just have to accept, all right, I did something wrong and this is the price I pay for it. But I knew I had done nothing wrong, which made it even more difficult.
That is difficult. I mean, not least that, again, it's a common experience for both our mums and dads that once your child is taken away, whether it's by abduction or whether it's, within the country, internationally, or for that matter, by a court, people start to question, well, what did you do that caused the parent to do that? Yeah. And I think that's where some of the isolation comes in, that people start drawing away from you. And yet you probably need more help than you've ever needed in your life at that point.
Oh, look, and also, you get the, particularly when things become public, you get the people sort of divide, there's this camp and there's that camp. And it's, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. You get those kinds of comments, and then people kind of, will line up behind that campaign, and the others will say, well, no, this person, I don't think this person would do that kind of thing. And, you get the camp that lines up behind them, and you're caught in the middle. You're constantly, I had to defend myself against all kinds of, pretty nasty stuff that was happening throughout that time. People who said, well, something must have happened.
Right. Well, look, I mean, we were not your case, but certainly there's a few high-profile cases with international abductions that, well, one comes to mind in the Middle East, which, you know, involved the media not that long ago, a few years ago.
Yeah.
And as an organization that looks after mums and dads, we actually heard from representatives from both sides, and the stories were entirely different. And I can imagine that being on the outside looking in, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because the rumor mills start going and both sides trying to attack the other side to justify.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's certainly not easy. And I mean, you know, in a way, I'm lucky in that it's 10 years now, and I've kind of been able to move on a little bit from that. But it's still there in my mind, you know, it's part of my brain where, you know, it lives and it won't go away. And every now and again, you know, it pops out and reminds me of what happened, and what, you know, until recently could potentially have happened again, because there's always the risk of a re-abduction. You know, once the child has been located and returned, you're always living with that fear, particularly when the child is still quite young.
Well, it's interesting. It's not the same thing, but I can relate to what you're saying. There's that thing that we, you know, what do they call it? I can't remember when parents traditionally hate it when their teenage children move out. I can't remember. It's like the nesting thing. It's like they've gone and it
empty nesting
syndrome. That's it. Well, interestingly, in my own case, which is a public one in many regards, not in all regards. Obviously, there are private aspects to it, but having been separated from my own daughter for nearly 11 years, when we did get reunited and she came back to live with me, after about 6 or 7 years, she was at the age where she wanted to move out. And I went into a blind panic just moving down the road.
Yeah.
And it is almost like complex PTSD, where you're programmed to be in fear of your child. And this is an adult now.
Yeah, and the risk is, I mean, there's a real risk that you become overprotective, and I had to deal with that. I mean, in the beginning, I was very, very, you know, protective, because I knew the damage that had been done, and I knew that, you know, the other party wasn't going to give up. You know, so there were all kinds of controls in place to try and prevent it from happening again, and to deal with it quickly if it did happen.
So where we left it was, we went off at a very interesting tangent, by the way.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, some of the insights. We're all about wisdom sharing. That's our little thing at Mums and Dads.
Yeah.
You had to get subpoenas from the airline, to find out the final destination. So can you take us from there? What happened?
That was just one of the many subpoenas that I had to get, actually. So that showed that they had flown from, we were able to establish that they had flown from Sydney to Singapore, and then from Singapore to Germany.
Right. Okay.
Right, to Frankfurt. So that then finally, and this was like quite some way down the track, finally had a destination that the central authority could then file an application at. Is that grammatically correct? Anyway, so until that, there's nothing they could do. They said, we have to know the country. And some countries not only require that you can identify the child as in their country, some will actually require that you identify the address the child is at.
Wow.
Yeah. Which makes it incredibly difficult, because these people are in hiding, they're being protected, and it's incredibly difficult to find them. So anyway, Germany, I was then able to file an application through the central authority. Now, the central authority doesn't really act on your behalf, it's country to country. So the central authority represents the Australian government. So they then make an application with, in my case, it was the German government, for the child to be located, and then eventually, returned through the Hague Convention process. And the German authorities, again, I mean, that was quite a long time. And then there was this interminable wait, from the Germans to find out if there was, if they had any news. But just to complicate matters, some countries require all the applications to be translated into their language. And that was the case in Germany. So then I had to wait until an official German translator had taken my application, my affidavits, translated them into German, and then they were filed with the German Central Authority. Saul builds just delay after delay after delay. So anyway, that was done. And I mean, then you hear nothing. And I was just going.
This is extraordinarily expensive as well.
I think the translation might have been paid for by the central authority, but I can't recall 100%. I think it was, but it was still a long, drawn-out process. You know, it can't just be somebody who speaks German. It has to be an authorized, certified translator, and there's not too many of them around. You know, so again, it takes time. So then that added another 2 or 3 weeks to the process, and then it was just, you know, I'd be contacting them every day, central authority. What's going on? What's going on? We've heard nothing. We've heard nothing. What are you doing about it? Well, we can't do anything. We have to wait until we hear back from the German central authority. Can't you hurry them up? No, we have to wait for them. So again, it was probably weeks until we got a reply from Germany, and the German central authority said they're not here. Simple as that. We can't find them. So then it was, well, they must be there. And the central authority said no. No, the police have assured us they're not in this country. And I remember the comment, they said, Germany is a very hard country to hide in, because everything is so well documented. You know, you stay in a hotel, everything is done, you know. So that you know, it was back to square one. Where do we go from here? We need a country. We didn't have a country. So by then, this is probably, I don't know, months, 6 months into the process. And during that entire time, I had a gag order on me. The family court wouldn't allow me to talk publicly about the abduction.
God, if there was another way they could make it harder for you
No, there's no other way.
Be the next thing that you wouldn't be allowed to do is to even talk.
No, I wasn't allowed to talk publicly about it. And the argument was, which I can kind of understand, is that they didn't want to alert the other parent to the fact that all this was happening behind the scenes, and they didn't want to alert people who might be supporting that parent, you know, within this country or within other countries, that, you know, all these things are happening. But after, I think it was about coming up for 6 months or 7 months, I made an application to the court for a publication order to be able to go public about my story. And that was based, and the court agreed, but there was a lot of discussion with the Central Authority and the Australian Federal Police and a whole lot of other people before that could be done. And then, you know, my case was able to be made public, and then I was able to start to get some media support for, you know, what I was trying to do, which was, you know, find my son and have him return. Now, one thing I kind of skipped over there, you think, you know, why is this so difficult? Why do you have to go through all this process? And how does the average person go through that? The big problem within Australia is that international parental child abduction is not a criminal offence.
And that is a really interesting insight.
Yeah.
I would never have guessed that.
It's either the only country within the developed world or one of very few countries within the developed world where it's not a criminal offence, which means that the abducting parent pretty well has a green light. The only circumstances under which it is a criminal offence is when parenting matters are before the courts.
Right.
My case was before the courts. That made it a criminal offence. Now, the vast majority of these cases occur before matters get to the court. The vast majority just come out of the blue. A lot of the parents don't even know the child's been abducted till they come home and suddenly they're not there anymore.
Yep.
I could probably give you a dozen cases that I know of where that's happened. The other parent had no idea. In one case, the mother-in-law actually drove the abducting parent to the airport with the child, thinking they were going to pick someone up. When they got to the airport, they've gone.
Even if we exclude the phenomena of actual abduction, a common phenomena that we see with lots of parents, whether it's mums or dads, who discover that they've been left by the other person and the other person has taken their kids. There's a nickname for it now, which has emerged out of America, which they call hoovering.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Naming them after the famous vacuum company, because you get home from work and the place has been cleaned out.
Yeah.
Everyone's gone, the kids, the furniture.
Yep.
And it's such a common phenomenon. It's actually quite frightening that it's happening without your knowledge.
Yeah, I think the international abductions, it's not the physical possessions aren't taken, other than personal belongings. Everything else is still there. So the other parent comes home and everything looks the same. But then, on further inspection, well, where are the clothes? Where are the kids' favorite toys? Where's this? Where's that? That's when they realise that something serious is wrong, and it can take days to find out, that your children have been taken. And then, the fact that it's not a criminal offence, makes it incredibly difficult. In my case, it was a criminal offence, but because at that time, these cases there wasn't a very high profile around these cases. Mm-hmm. And even the Australian Federal Police didn't believe it was a criminal offence. I had to convince them it was a criminal offence. They said, "Oh no, this is just a civil matter. It's an issue between the parents. It's got nothing to do with us." And fortunately, with my background, I'd had dealings with federal legislation before. Sure. And I knew that it was a criminal offence. Their argument was, this isn't contained within the Crimes Act, therefore it's not a criminal offence. But it was written into the Family Law Act, and I said, well, that's a piece of federal legislation. That's law. You can't ignore that. Anyway, they eventually agreed, but again, this was months later. And until you can have the criminal dimension added to it, you can't get Interpol alerts, because Interpol will only issue an alert on the request of a police agency, a federal police agency. Federal police agency won't issue an alert for something that's not a criminal offence. So, straight away, you're behind the eight ball. And even when, the application is made, so it's not a criminal offence, the country that the central authority makes the application to will often give it a low priority, because they'll say, well, it's not a criminal offence in your country. Why should we give it a higher priority here than anything else? So at every step in the process, you put further and further and further and further behind the eight ball. That's why, I argued for it to become a criminal offence, but it's still not in Australia.
It is truly shocking. And I can't think of the name now, but there was a Hollywood movie 10, 15 years ago, and it made reference to a group of ex-special forces people who work for the rich. It's a mythical story.
Yeah.
Now I'm beginning to understand why, where their role was to go out and actually grab kids that had been abducted from their parents.
Oh, there's a whole industry. It exists within Australia as well. Generally in the opposite direction. They're engaged by parents who have just they've run out of options, and they know where their kids are, but nothing is working, and so they'll pay people. They're called retrievers or recovery agents or whatever, right. To track them down and basically re-abduct them and try and get them back to the country.
So take us to what led to you going to Europe, because you've gone to a dead end with Germany.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, I'd run into a dead end everywhere. And I remember talking to the central authority, and I've developed a really good relationship with them. After a year down the track, I said, well, nothing's happening. What happens now? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, we'll keep your son on our books until he turns, I think, 16. And I said, what happens then? They said, he comes off the books.
He's an adult. Yeah. In their eyes,
it might have been 18. I can't remember now. But, that was it. We can't really do anything because we don't know where he is. We can't make an application to a country because we don't know what country the child is in. I was making inquiries all around the world. Couldn't find anything. By then I think I hadn't been able to work for a few months. So I was that sick. And in the end, I ended up taking a medical retirement because I just couldn't function properly. And I couldn't really do much at all. And one of the things I said at the beginning was, I've always had a strong interest in cycling. But I'd lost that, during this. I'd lost that will to do that. I wasn't doing anything. But I had a next door neighbour at the time who was a very keen cyclist as well, and he kind of got me back into riding the bike again. And he said, "Come on, let's go for a ride." Every day after work, he'd come to my place. Let's go for a ride somewhere, So we do a ride, and that kind of got me back into doing something a little bit different. But I was always thinking, what else can I do? I had a massive social media campaign going. This is back in the day when Facebook was pretty new, and all those social media platforms were very, very new. And at the time, I had the largest search for a missing person ever undertaken on social media.
Well, here's an irony. So here I live in Australia and I work in this sector now, but I was a dodgy Brit in Britain at the time, and I remember it in the media.
Yeah.
I remember it actually coming up. I didn't know it was you. It's quite amazing all these years later that I get it. But I remember it coming up.
I couldn't do anything else, and I'd had a big burst of media here. But, nothing really came from that. But what that did was it built me a really good foundation to build on when I did start to go overseas myself. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I was at this point, what do I do? Well, I've done everything I can do. I can't just sit back and wait till he's 16 or 18 or whatever. And I'll never forget, I was riding along on my bike one day, and I remember thinking, what else can I do? What else can I do? What else can I do? And I looked down at the front wheel of the bike and I thought, I can do this. I can ride a bike. I can ride a bike. So I went, saw my next door neighbour. I said, I've got this idea. What do you think? I'm thinking about taking my bike and riding through Europe and wherever else I end up, and just trying to draw attention to the fact that my son is missing and try and get as much media as I can. You know what it's like sometimes. You come up with an idea and it sounds great in your head. And as soon as you start to articulate it, you think, oh, no, that's not going to work, And so it was coming out for the first time. And he said, I think it's a great idea. So, oh, really? And then I remember I was going to Dads in Distress, the meetings. And I think that same week I brought it up at the meeting. And again, as it came out, I thought, these guys are going to think I'm crazy, But they all said, yeah, do it, So, okay, I'll do it. And that's how it came about. I just thought,
you're blaming us for what you did.
No, it was great. It was great. It was the thing I needed to do.
Wow. So,
where do I start? By then I had some supporters. I had some supporters in Australia. The Morecambe Foundation in Queensland were Daniel Morecambe Foundation. They were very, very supportive, and they said, look, we want to help in some way. And also there was a group in the UK called Forever Searching, Missing Children organisation. They were great. They helped me with a lot of video campaigns. They had posters up on the side of bus sheds right across England.
I think that's how I got to know about it, actually. Well, there you go. Interesting link back.
Yeah, and they had these posters you see on the side, these moving posters you see on the side of bus sheds with about, 10 or 12 missing children. And my son was there right next to Madeleine McCann on that same poster. I thought, my God, this is where it is. This is where we are. There's Madeleine McCann and there's my son, and the whole world is hopefully, keeping an eye out for them. And then I had the support of the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the US as well. So they came on board as well. So they were putting material out all over the place as well.
Interesting. So for all the negativity, or sort of the negative side of things, the problems, the bureaucracy, the red tape, the wading through treacle, as we would say in the UK, you did get some international help, which is really intriguing.
Yeah, but people found out about it. I think I had the back in those days Facebook, and there was another platform that I can't remember. I think it doesn't exist anymore. You could post videos onto it, and I think they saw those and they contacted me, and then they would put me in contact with someone else. I think Forever Searching put me in contact with National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the US. Then they put me onto another organisation in Canada. And then somebody else put me onto another organisation in Italy. So, eventually I built this kind of network of organisations that were all kind of doing the same thing, but in their own way. and just kept on raising the profile. And then, I mean, I had a website. Again, websites were pretty new in those days. You know, a website, somebody created a website for me, and everything was put onto the website. All the newspaper articles, all the media stories from Australia were all uploaded onto the website. So people anywhere in the world could see this is a genuine campaign. You know, it's not just some guy off doing his own thing. And then, you know, once I'd worked out I had to get on my bike. And then I had, you know, like cyclists, Tour de France, you know, they all have all the cycling gear, you know, so I had all the cycling gear made with a picture of my son on the back and a web address and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And then I went to Hong Kong first because there was a potential sighting there. So I did a bit of cycling in Hong Kong. Then I went to England, cycled through England, up to the northern part of England anyway. And then it was across to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I wore that cycling outfit every single day. I had 2 or 3 of them. And, you know, I just got as much attention as I possibly could. The forever searching people.
What was on the clothing?
Picture of my son.
Right.
And the web address underneath that and a phone number. And I had... So I was getting kind of media contacts through those missing children organisations. And also there was a woman in Australia, in Melbourne. I won't name her, but she had a media background. So she was kind of working ahead of me, you know, trying to get as much media coverage for me in Europe as she could. Sometimes we got it, sometimes we didn't.
So this is interesting. So for those people that might not be aware of what you're up against there, Europe fits into Australia.
They all speak different languages.
About the same size as Australia. So if you exclude Russia and, you know, the eastern part of the far east of Europe, but you're looking at an enormous area, the area of Australia, the size of Australia, with 500 million people in it. Now,
and a whole range of different languages.
Potential starting point. You went through the UK. You go over to France.
Yep. Cycle through.
How did you decide where to cycle?
Yeah. There was, again, another father that I had met through Dads in Distress, had done a cycling trip through Europe. And by that stage, he wasn't very well. And he told me about this bicycle route that went across the northern part of France. And I thought, I'm going to ride that kind of in honour of him, you know.
Yeah.
So I went down into the centre of France, then cycled across and then into Belgium. And then I cycled down through the middle of Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, the Netherlands, in and out of Germany several times, Poland, Czech Republic. You know, and I had a big supply that I would get restocked from the people at the Forever Searching organisation in the UK, which was really, it was just 2 mums, you know, 2 beautiful ladies, lovely ladies. So I had a stockpile of these stickers with the same stuff that was on the back of my shirt in different languages. You know, I had French, German, Italian, whatever, you know, and everywhere I'd go, I'd be putting these stickers up all over the place. And
how did people kind of react to this? I mean, was this crazy Aussie? I know there's obviously a bit of a sad story behind this, but there's kind of an amusing side to this crazy Aussie cycling around.
It's a bit like that. Because of the way I was decked out, people would often come up and talk to me, you know, and cyclists pretty well around the world, you know, they're seen as non-threatening. You know, people will talk.
You haven't ridden through London?
I have.
Oh my God. Have you done Milan or Rome?
No, I haven't done there, but I certainly did cycle through London. Yeah.
Right.
People are, you know, they'll talk to a cyclist.
Yeah.
And if you go and approach someone, they're more likely to talk to you than if you're driving in a car.
Of course, yeah.
So you kind of build this relationship with people pretty quickly. So they're all curious, what's this all about? What are you doing this? Why this? Where this? And some of those people would say, oh, look, I know somebody who works at a local TV station, I'll give them a call, or have you contacted this radio station? And that's how it worked. I mean, my whole strategy was all about trying to raise the profile to the point where somebody might recognize that picture, and it might be somebody in a hairdressing salon, or a corner store, or a butcher, or someone who would go, oh, I've seen that child. Oh, I'll do something about that. And that's really how it panned out. Not quite the way I expected, but it worked. It worked that way.
So can you talk at all about that? If you can't go there, I understand. But
I can go there. I was a teacher at a school in the Netherlands, became suspicious about something that the mother of one of the students had said. And that made her think, she thought, I wonder if someone's looking for this child. So she Googled missing children Australia, and she said, third click, and there was my son's photograph.
Wow.
And then she thought, and then she said, what convinced me that this was a genuine father, with serious concerns for his child, was all the media reports. She said the media wouldn't have got behind this if this guy was a bad guy, So that then prompted her to contact the local police. And the local police obviously, didn't know anything about my particular case. And she said, go onto this website. And she said, there's an Interpol alert there. By then there was an Interpol red notice, which is the highest Interpol alert. So they checked the website. They contacted Interpol, and Interpol said, take the child into custody straight away. Get the child, the child's at risk. So they went to the school, took my son, and then waited for his mother to come and collect him, and they arrested her. Okay. So that was almost 3 years.
Where were you at the time, just out of interest?
I'd actually been through the Netherlands, and I had a bit of a break in the Netherlands. I was a bit exhausted by the time I got there. And I'd spent about probably a week or so there, but I couldn't get any media. It was the one country I couldn't get any media. And so I'd cycled right through the Netherlands. Then I'd gone back into Germany. So Germany was still a place because that was where they had flown to initially. And she had a background with that country as well. And I thought, Germany, I've really got to I can't just skirt around Germany. So I kept on going in and out of Germany. I'd gone back into Germany a few times, and then into Poland, because Poland's a notorious safe haven for parents who abduct children. So I had to go into Poland. Poland's a vast country, and I didn't go that far into Poland, but I went into Poland. And then I came back into Germany again, and then I went into the Czech Republic. Now, the main reason I went into the Czech Republic was by then I was thinking, I've done a lot of cycling. I've been through a few countries, and I'm kind of running out of countries. Where do I go next? And really the only places I was going to head down towards Spain and Portugal, and then go across to Italy. But the only way to get there was through Austria and Switzerland, and they've got some big mountains. And I thought, I need a bit of practice on mountains. So I went through the Czech Republic to sort of build my kind of climbing skills on the mountains. And I came back out of the Czech Republic, and I was in Germany, come back into Germany, and that was when I got the first sign that my son had been found.
I mean, did you get it? You got it confirmed relatively quickly that it was?
Not really. It was an anonymous email, and all it said was, no, there was no name. It was an email that somebody had sort of created on Gmail or whatever was around in those days, and it just simply said, your son is safe.
Wow.
Or your son has been found, your son is safe. And I replied saying, what's going on? I need more information. Because, I mean, I had quite a few false alerts along the way. So, you're not quite sure whether to, follow up on those and sort of take a different path on your journey. And on a bicycle, it's not that easy.
Well, I'm dying to ask you, when you did actually find out that it was son, did you cycle to the Netherlands, or did you just throw your bike on the side?
No, I was in Germany, and I was in Stuttgart, and I was in contact, and he had met me a couple of times in Germany with a father whose children had been abducted from Germany to Australia. Right, so he and I had established contact, and he was just giving me support, a bit of moral support as I went around Germany. And so he was in Stuttgart. So I was just about to get to Stuttgart when I got the news, and then I got the train. I got a train from Stuttgart up to Amsterdam. But the kind of funny thing about that is that, I needed confirmation. I couldn't just go on that email, So eventually this person said, I've spoken to the police in my country. I still didn't know what country it was. I've spoken to the police in my country, and they will contact you. And then I'm waiting. And it was probably 24 hours, and I got contacted. It was an email, and I was still suspicious. I thought, no, this could be anyone sort of throwing a red herring. But it did have the police name in the address, and I thought, pretty hard to, create a false police email address. So I remember I spoke to him, and I was still not convinced. I still thought this could be somebody just, throwing in a red herring. And the thing that made me realise he was serious, I said, why is it taking you so long to contact me? And he said, I had to contact Australia, and I had to do this, and I had to do that. And he said, a lot of paperwork. And I thought, yep, he's a cop. So then I thought, that this is real.
There are bright moments in a dark situation, and I'm glad that you're sharing them with us.
Yeah, so those kinds of things happen. And then when I got to Amsterdam, again, I had my bike on the train, and I had nothing. I just, was on my bike and got to Amsterdam, got off the train, and I remember I got there at, I think, it was either 4:15 or 5:15 in the afternoon, and I rang the police the police officer, because he knew I was coming, and they said, oh, he's not here. And I said, oh, but he's expecting my call. And they said, 5:15, he's gone home. So I had to wait for the next day.
Oh, the insanity of it all. Close, yet so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so, then I met him the next day, and he explained, what had happened and where my son was. But even then, I still couldn't see my son for probably another week or so after that, because the authorities there wanted to verify everything, validate everything. They had rules they had to follow. It was very similar to docs in Australia, but I guess, the Dutch equivalent. No, very good, very thorough. I mean, I'm so pleased that he was found in that country. Because Netherlands, it's the home of the Hague Convention for a start.
Well, of course, yeah.
And their child protection system is extremely good.
Yeah. I used to actually, for a short while, live in Amsterdam, so I have a sense of the country, and it's a great country in so many ways. Yeah,
it was massive over there when he was found. It was like front page news everywhere. I mean, people were coming up to me in the street and congratulating. I was in tears most of the time. Perfect strangers, people driving along, bipping their horns and waving, because they were very pleased that he'd been found in their country. It was phenomenal.
But there's so many things I want to ask you from a technical perspective, but I'm fascinated by the human side of this. I mean, the kind of reunification with your son must have been amazing.
Oh, that was, yeah. Yeah, that was, yeah, that was quite difficult as well because, and I'm sure people watching this, understand the whole parental alienation phenomenon.
Yep.
And, a lot of damage had been done.
Sure, of course.
That whole process had to be managed very, very carefully.
Sure.
And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks before I could actually spend any time with him alone away from the place that he was staying.
Right, I understand.
They managed that whole thing extremely carefully.
It's a very difficult situation, and it's an emerging science on how to actually deal with these situations, because effectively the child's been turned against you. They've been brainwashed. What do you do with that?
Yeah. So I had to. We had to go through all that, and then there were all the court cases over there as well. Because the Hague Convention is not simply you push a button and the child is returned. It's really the beginning of yet another process, and that process is pretty complicated as well, and time-consuming.
But without getting into any more detail, your son's back home with you now.
Yep. It has been for almost 10 years.
Wonderful. Everything good on that front?
Yeah. Obviously it was difficult in the beginning. He had, lost his father for 3 years, and then he lost his mother, and then there was all the trauma. Then she was only allowed to see him under supervised contact. So, while we're going through court case after court case after court case in this country. So, and it was difficult for him, starting school, new school, and, we had to try and keep, his situation relatively quiet from the other kids. The parents and the teachers were fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Fantastic.
Yeah, police were great.
Well, look, if you're okay, if I can ask you a few technical questions, because there's so many things on the back of this that other parents who are experiencing something similar, or they know someone that's going through it.
Yeah.
Is this a common thing?
Yep.
To abduct your child?
Yep, sure is. Australia has the highest per capita rate of international parental child abduction in the world.
Wow.
The numbers are really difficult to get hold of. This is like, chapters in a book. We're now on this chapter. You could write a whole book about this, on its own. The Hague Convention is it's in place between signatory countries to the Hague Convention. Okay, not every country is a signatory. There's 191 or 198 countries. I can't remember the exact figure in the world now, but there's only 101 of them that are signatories to the Hague Convention. So if your child is taken to a country that's not a signatory to the Hague Convention, you've got nowhere to go. And that's where these, the child recovery people are coming to play, because there's no other way of having these children located or returned from those countries. Just
from the experience that we have as dads in distress, well, I say dads and mums, but my personal experience will be working with the dads. Even if it is a Hague Convention country, you can have real problems based on the variability in how they look at these issues, particularly really foreign culture. If it's an Asian culture, for example, vastly different kind of cultural standards, language systems. It's
there's different tiers. The Hague Convention countries, there's those countries that are highly compliant. And they're countries generally like the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, the Netherlands, one or two of the Northern European countries. So they're, very, very high level of compliance. And then you drop down to another level of the countries that are kind of somewhat compliant. And that will depend very much on the ethnicity of the parent who's abducted the child. And it will depend very much on whether or not that child has any kind of, like a passport for that country. They might have, dual passports or whatever. Those countries tend to lean more towards the abducting parent, right? Then you get down into another level of countries that are just non-compliant. They're signatories, but, your chances of finding a child and having your child returned are pretty low. Some of those are more some of the Southern European countries, former Eastern Bloc countries, African countries, South American countries. It's a whole different ballgame there. That's why I was so pleased that my son was found in the Netherlands, because I knew that that was a country that had a high level of compliance. But even amongst the complying countries, there are a number of defences that the abducting parent can use. There's 6 defences under the Hague Convention, and they will generally try, there's probably 3 or 4 of those that they will try to have applied to their case. And there's varying levels of success.
Well, it's interesting to me that you said, for example, that the UK is quite compliant, and I can believe that that would be the case.
Yeah.
But intriguingly, even if you were to look at the UK, for example, I happen to know this, that if your child is Australian with 2 Australian parents, then there's a requirement for 2 signatures to get a passport.
Yes.
The young child, it's more difficult for an Aussie to abduct a child from another Aussie, because you have to have a passport to get them out of the country.
Yeah.
But if you happen to be a British parent, you can get a British passport with 1 signature from one.
That's the case in most countries.
And that's frightening.
Yeah.
That's frightening that they can get a passport behind your back for a child and disappear.
Yeah. That's right. And if the child has dual nationality, they can have the Australian passport and then get another passport with just that child's name, that parent's signature, and then, continue to travel around the world on that passport. There's so many holes in the system.
Well, that I think most people would, at least in this kind of field or sector, would be aware that you can get an airport watch book where a child is prevented. But I'm wondering, is that tied to a passport, or is that tied to the?
No, there's a passport. I can't remember what they call it now. A pass system. I went through that process as well. And again, this is another gap in the system. It was all identified there was a Senate inquiry into this, and these issues were all identified. Although there's a provision within the Family Law Act that prevents the removal of a child from Australia without the consent of the parent and or the court, that doesn't appear anywhere on any of the immigration databases, right? So now, even if the court issues a specific order that says the child, so you've got the act, and then if the court says, well, that's not enough, we're actually going to spell this out in the court orders that the parent can't take the child out of the country, that's not passed on to the Department of Immigration. So the child doesn't automatically go onto the watch system.
Right.
Okay. So when these are things that you kind of have to know. This is where I often help other parents going through this process, because I now know how it works. When you get the order that says the child is not to leave the country, what you have to do then is you have to instruct your lawyer to make an application for the child to be put on the airport watch list. Right. A parent can't do it. It's got to be done by a lawyer. Now, a lot of lawyers don't even know about it. Not a lot of lawyers have experience with international parental child abduction, certainly not in Australia. I can probably name 3 or 4 that, have experience, but most don't.
No, I'd back that actually, because certainly with the parents that we work with, quite often where there's a fear that the child might be abducted because there's a parent of foreign extraction, for want of a better way of putting it, we've said to them, you do realise that if it's a real concern for you and you have grounds for it, then you can get airport watch. It's astonishing to us how often they come back and go, well, my lawyer doesn't know how to do that.
Right, that's exactly right. There is an exception. If you've got an immediate, if you have a concern that there's an immediate threat to your child being taken out of the country and it's outside normal court hours, you can contact the court directly. But it's pretty hard to find the number of the after-hours judge. There's an after-hours judge. I used to have the number, but I'm not quite sure I've got it now. There's an after-hours judge, and you can contact the after-hours judge and put your case forward. You have to explain, what your fears are and why you think it's an imminent abduction, and then they will issue a court order, and that will then allow you to have the airport watch put in place. Okay. But it's not straightforward. And then you still need to go to court probably within about 2 weeks to have that formalised in a normal court setting.
Something, just to bring you back, something you mentioned a little while ago as well. You said that this is a common phenomenon, particularly in Australia. Mm. Why is that? What's your view on that?
Well, firstly, it's not a criminal offence, I'm not committing any crime. I can do whatever I want. I can take my child out of the country. There's no law that says I can't. So, that's the first kind of green light, I suppose. There's no hurdle there. You can just do
to
it.
remove. It's hard to get back. So
Yeah, once you're gone, you're gone. Then it's up to you to get us back. And if you don't know where we are, then that's going to make it even harder. And then you'll have to make your argument to the Hague Convention, and we can go into hiding for quite a long time, and then that has implications for your Hague application further down the track. A lot of people in Australia who have different cultural backgrounds, they come from countries that are located a long way from Australia.
And of course, that's a common phenomenon here, isn't it? That it's a common demographic that we have so much immigration.
Most multicultural, country on the planet. But if you're in a relationship in, say, Germany, and your partner comes from the Netherlands, and your relationship breaks down, you're not that far from your family. It's just basically, from our way of thinking, it's just down the road. So, but here the distance is much greater. And if people are in a relationship and they think it's not working, or they don't like being here, they're such a long way from their family, and they want to get back there. That's where they feel they're going to get the support. That's where they're going to feel more comfortable. That's where they're going to feel, for want of a better word, safer. International travel is, up until recently with COVID, it's been very easy to get out of Australia. Very, very easy. Airfares are relatively cheap. I mean, they're even cheaper now than they were 30 years ago. So it's an easy country to get out of. And once you're out, it's very, very hard to get you back.
Well, you also mentioned, I think one time I heard you say that there's a season for it.
Yeah.
It tends to happen at certain times of year. Now, what's that about?
Holiday season.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. People want to get back to their families or whatever. And one of it's a ploy that is sometimes used by an abducting parent, particularly if the relationship's already over, or if it's kind of close to being over and the child's living with one parent or the other. One of the parents will appeal to the other parent to allow the children, or the child or the children, to travel overseas to see their extended family over the Christmas break. Now, most parents will agree to that. But once you've agreed to your child being taken out of the country, even if it's for a short time under the provisions of the Hague Convention, that's a defence to not having the child returned.
Right.
Okay, so, I'm familiar with quite a few cases where that's been the case, and the parent gets to the other country and then delays the return, and then eventually says, we're not coming back.
It's a complex situation, and I can actually ironically see it from both sides, because just in my own situation, I remember when being separated from my daughter that I couldn't take her on holiday because the mother would say he's going to abduct the child.
Right.
I wasn't going to. I just wanted to take her to Italy for a week.
And in most cases, that's the case. But it's that small number of situations in which there's another agenda operating.
Cool.
Parents have to be really cognizant of that. And if they do allow the parents, the children, to leave the country with the other parent, get it in writing. Get a departure date, get a return date, get copies of airline tickets and so forth. But I'm familiar with one case recently where all that was done, and the parents just said, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And there's not much you can do other than go through your Hague Convention process in that country.
So look, I mean, I'm just conscious we spoke for quite a while.
Yes.
And actually that's a really good pivot point for me, which is what fundamentally needs to change in your opinion. I mean, you've touched on things like it's not a criminal act, etc.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to change? What if you
that's the number one thing.
Okay.
That's the number one thing. It needs to become a criminal offence in Australia, because that then opens all kinds of doors for the left behind parent to do things that will increase the likelihood of the child being returned. That's the number one thing. That's the most important thing. I think, if there's a hierarchy, and I haven't really thought about this for a while, the second thing would be, I think, as soon as you get into any kind of family court situation, then I think there should be an automatic link between the family court and the immigration department. This matters before the family court and involves parenting issues. This child has to go on the airport watch now.
That would make sense. That's
But it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen.
It's interesting what you said as well about it being, making it a criminal act, because I remember meeting the Chief Justice here a few years ago, and the conversation, well, it's kind of technically confidential, but we were discussing, you know, what would you do if you could change one thing? And I remember saying to him that I stole this from one of my colleagues at Dads in Distress, so I'll give him a shout out. It's Alan Valger, who was at our very first meeting, and he's still on our helpline to this day.
Right.
He said to me when I challenged him a few years ago, what would you say is the one thing? And he said, I can say it in one word, and it's accountability.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the failures of the system, in almost every context, it's about lack of accountability.
Yeah.
You can't enforce this, you can't enforce that. And this is a classic example where it's easy for someone to leave, impossible to get them back.
Very difficult.
Made them accountable for their action.
And incredibly expensive, you know. Yep. I mean, even though the central authority made application on, you know, on my behalf, if you like, you know, through the Australian government, I still had to engage a lawyer in the Netherlands, you know, to kind of oversee the whole thing and to advise me on, you know, what needed to be done and what was happening. I mean, all the legal proceedings are all conducted in a foreign language. I needed to have an interpreter so I understood what was going on. You know, a very, very good lawyer in the Netherlands who, you know, without her, you know, I think I really would have been struggling. So you still got that cost, you know, on top of everything else. Your legal fees in Australia, the legal fees in Australia are phenomenal because you have to keep on going back to court every time you run into an obstacle. You have to go back to court to have that obstacle removed. I mean, really, it should be more streamlined. It should be, okay, you know, this child has been taken from this country unlawfully. This is what needs to be done. You know, recovery order, location order, passport cancellation, you know, all those things all need to be done that day instead of being strung out over months and months and months and being left up to the parent who really doesn't understand or doesn't know how the whole thing works. I was lucky. I mean, I had a background. I worked in a very senior position as a public servant. I'd worked in government for a long time. I'd worked with politicians. I'd worked with the federal government. I kind of knew how the system worked, you know, and I spoke English. You know, imagine if you're from a foreign country and you're trying to navigate through this and English isn't your first language. It's incredibly difficult. And a lot of those parents give up. They just can't. They can't cope. They can't handle it. They just don't know what to do.
Interesting you say that, because in one of the groups I run in Sydney, we have a dad. I won't say much more than this, but he's from another country. English is not his first language, and he visits here several times a year as a visitor, on a, what do you call it, like a holiday visa.
Yeah.
Because he can't come and work here. He has no rights. He struggles with English.
Yeah.
His child was abducted by an Australian person to Australia.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for him, because not only is he traveling to another part of the world, but there's the language issue, and he's got no one around him.
That's right.
It's a foreign culture on top of everything else.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it's a horrible situation to find yourself in. Yeah. And you have to kind of learn as you're going. You have to kind of navigate your way through this process at a time when you're at extreme emotional disadvantage. It's very hard. It's very hard.
I guess if we kind of focus on you for a moment, in hindsight, what would you have done differently given everything you know now? What would you have done? If any,
day one, would have had the airport watch put in place.
That's an interesting insight for some of the people who believe they might be at risk.
Look, you know, when I get contacted by people that are going through the thing, there's a bit of a checklist I go through. But, you know, one of the first things, you know, I'll ask is, you know, is there an airport watch in place? And there's generally people who might have a concern. Nothing's happened. But they'll say, look, you know, I'm a bit worried about this. First thing I say is get the airport watch. Get that put in place straight away. Get a lawyer if they haven't got a lawyer, and get the lawyer to make an application to the family court.
Probably get a lawyer who actually has some experience of international abductions, presumably, because it sounds like it's a bit of a nightmare.
It is. The downside of that is when you make the application for the child to go on the airport watch, the other parent can contest it. So the other parent can, you know, go to court and say, it doesn't need to be done. You know, I'm not going to do this. I've got a job here. You know, I've got assets. I've got this, that, and the other. And, you know, try to convince the judge that it's not necessary. But these days, you know, my case was a really high-profile case. There's been a few since then. I think it would be a brave judge that didn't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Let's say, so if other parents are impacted by this, it's already happened to them, where would you suggest they go? And do you still connect with other parents? Just
Yeah, I do. You kind of have to, there's a distinction here, like where they go depends on what part of the world the child has been taken to. Right now, typically we're talking about mothers and fathers before. Typically, the mothers abduct children to Hague Convention countries. All right?
That's
That's
interesting.
generally where they come from. All right?
Okay.
They have European, American, maybe parts of South African, New Zealand background. When men abduct children, they're generally taken to Middle Eastern countries.
That's intriguing.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a demographic pattern there as well.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, probably 80%, of abductions by mothers go to Europe. 80% of abductions by fathers go to the Middle East.
Wow.
Or Asia, or South America, or Africa, or sort of former Eastern Bloc countries. Because particularly in the Middle Eastern countries, the male has the authority and the power and the culture that supports the male.
Of course.
And also, those countries aren't signatories to the Hague Convention.
It's actually intriguing to me, and I don't. I'm kind of. I tend to kind of put a positive spin on things, but there is a bit of a pattern here, which I found interesting. As a dad, having gone through it and joining dads in distress, the more mums I met coming to mums in distress, the more I realised that actually it can work both ways.
Yeah.
And actually, so much of it is down to the culture that people come from.
Exactly right.
As much as dads here might say, women always do this and they get away with it and nobody cares and that's women. Intriguingly, you go to certain parts of the world like the Middle East, it's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
It is a human problem.
Yeah, it is. It's
dependent on the law.
really difficult. It's easy to sort of sit back and stereotype and say, women get a dream run in the family court or whatever. But it's not real.
Yeah.
I
agree.
It's a very situation. I think there might, in all honesty, I think there is a bias towards females in the family court in Australia. But I think that same bias exists in most, Western countries.
And actually, ironically, going back to having conversations with senior legal people in different countries and politicians, one of the things that you learn is that, just as a general comment, there is a philosophy in the developed countries to preserve the status quo of what existed before.
Yeah.
So if you were a dad who went to work and mum was at home, or she was working but part-time and she did the majority of care, there's a general bias towards, well, we'll keep it like that because that's what you decided to do before.
Exactly right.
So it's not necessarily we're anti-male or anti-female. It's more, well, we're just keeping it the way it was. And that needs to be worked out because these days, at the point of separation, maybe we need to the whole relationship.
Then you've got the legal system, which is slow to change.
Yeah.
And, it's built on precedent. So they go back to what did we do before? We did that. Back in 1973, here's the case. This is the case law. That's what we did. This was the decision that was made. We'll do it again. And you see that all the time.
Ken, look, I'm just conscious that I have gone so over my time. I think I could talk to you for a whole week. I wouldn't run out of things to talk about. So I'm wondering, we might need to get you back one day. But look, I'm going to have to draw this to a halt. Is there anything from your perspective that you feel we should have covered today that we haven't around this subject?
No, I think it's important to realise that, this is not just like fathers who are affected by this, mothers are affected by it as well. I think, the fact that the legislation has got a massive hole in it, and no politician on either side of mainstream politics seems to want to close that hole. And, the fact that
I think most of the time
the parent who's left behind, is not just left behind, they're left holding all the baggage as well. They have to do all the work. They've got to do the hard yards, and it shouldn't be like that. There should be a kind of step-by-step process that's followed by the courts, that kind of compresses that huge time frame into a day. All these things should be done day one, not 6 months down the track.
Well, look, Ken, thank you for that. And actually, maybe if you show us that award, that we need to link it back. So it was Finding Your Child in the Netherlands got you that award, Dad of the Year.
Yeah, did you want to see it again? Did you?
Come on, let's have another little look at it.
Can you see it?
Oh, there we go. Good to
There we
see
go. That was it there.
All
Yeah.
right. Ken, thank you so much for your time. You've been amazing. I'm so glad that we got this on the record.
Good.
It's been a story that I've wanted to hear for such a long time, and to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. You know.
All right. All the best. Okay.